Hello, hello, and welcome back to Leninhawk Tawk, the podcast-like thing that I record but put on YouTube because that's the place I put things on. I'm your host, David Leninhawk, and I haven't uploaded anything to YouTube in a little bit, over a month now. I think I was just waiting for Vinegar Syndrome to ship a package. But because they had some sort of weird impromptu sale, that was delayed. So I actually just got a shipping notification today, which is August 29th when I'm recording this. Anyway, plus the month of August was a little not good for me, but you know, it's looking up for September. But I wanted to talk about something that kind of became a controversy. I guess it's still a controversy until the film gets released. But something that there was a trailer that was released, a regular trailer, because there had already been a teaser, for the film Blonde, which is sort of a biopic, but not really, of Marilyn Monroe. Now, what is most notable about this film right now, because people haven't really seen it, is that it got an NC-17 rating. It is the only film of 2022 to be rated NC-17, from the best of my knowledge, and it was rated that for, quote, some sexual content. That's all it says. So this is a Netflix film. I don't know if it's going to be getting a limited theatrical release to qualify for the Oscars. I would assume it will, but I don't know for sure. I'm hoping it does because my local Alamo Drafthouse usually gets Netflix movies. That's like I saw Mank and The Irishman and stuff, and this is pre-COVID before, well, I guess Mank was during COVID, but before there was a whole deal where Cinemark will show Netflix movies. But I've never seen an NC-17 film in the theater. I think the closest I've come, and I may have mentioned this prior, was the movie The Aristocrats, the movie that was co-directed by Penn from Penn and Teller, and it's about the world's like dirtiest joke, and it's kind of a improv riff jazz kind of thing on that joke. I did see that in the theater, but I think it was released unrated as opposed to an NC-17, though if it had been rated, it would have gotten an NC-17 for language. And obviously I've seen NC-17 films, you know, on home video and whatever. Blue is the Warmest Color is probably the last notable NC-17 film since that won the Palme d'Or. But I've still never seen a quote-unquote officially rated NC-17 film that didn't, you know, edit itself down for an R or didn't appeal successfully like Blue Valentine did, or didn't just surrender its rating like Requiem for a Dream did. So just to sort of check that off on my bucket list, I'm hoping it gets a theatrical release. But there's some controversy specifically about this film getting an NC-17, and it seems to mostly come from hardcore Marilyn Monroe fans. Marilyn Monroe, obviously a huge icon, movie star, died tragically young. There's conspiracy theories about her death, including in the novel that this movie is based on. But she had a really rough life, and she died tragically, so people, especially her fan base, are protective of her because she was exploited so much in her life that they don't want to see her exploited in death. Plus, there was that recent thing where I think Kim Kardashian wore an old Marilyn dress to the Met Gala, maybe, and she like ruined it because it's not her fucking size. Just one of the many reasons why the Kardashians, one's a Star Trek alien and one's a rich family, are just pieces of shit who shouldn't be famous. Does anybody even like them, like on a non-ironic, like genuine level? Is anyone actually like a fan of that family or any of the members of it? I'm not sure. Neither here nor there. But so people are protective of Marilyn Monroe, and they see like, oh, well, this is an NC-17 rated film. It's about Marilyn Monroe. Obviously, it's going to exploit her for sexual content. Now, the thing about this controversy is we don't know what the content of the movie really is. We've had a teaser trailer, we've had a full-length trailer, but as far as I know, unless somebody worked for the movie, it hasn't screened anywhere. I think it's screening for some film festivals a little bit later on, I think in this month. And then it'll obviously drop on Netflix and maybe have a tertiary theater run. But the people who are upset about this, they don't even know what the rating is for. They're just assuming. Now, the film does not exist in a vacuum. I should say, I think I've alluded to this, but it is not a traditional biopic of Marilyn Monroe. It's not just the story of her life. And movies about Marilyn Monroe, they've taken a lot of different avenues. I remember one where Norma Jean, which is her actual name before she took the stage name Marilyn Monroe, there was one called Norma Jean and Marilyn, where the Norma Jean aspect and the Marilyn aspect are played by two different actresses. I think it's one of Ashley Judd and Mira Sorvino, and it sort of took like a almost like split personality type deal with it, and that was an HBO movie. But Blonde is based on a novel, so it is a fictional novel about a historical person, so historical fiction, I suppose you could call it. And it's written by Joyce Carol Oates. Joyce Carol Oates is a respected author. I think Blonde is probably her most well-known novel. She doesn't have the best taste in movies, though. She recently upset film Twitter by tweeting that she did not like Everything Everywhere All at Once. I mean, she's allowed to not like the movie. I personally very much liked it, and a lot of other people did. But maybe her taste isn't so much. But so it's a fictional novel about Marilyn Monroe, so it's based on her life. I think the various men in her life, the book uses pseudonyms for them. So yeah, it's kind of there. I think it also argues, I haven't read the book, I should say, so someone who's read the book would probably know more about this and could speak to it better than I could. But I believe it ends with one of the Kennedys like murdering Monroe and making it look like a suicide, so it already has that. But what people are latching onto is that this novel, now we don't know the film, but the novel's been out for 22 years, it was published in 2000, the novel has a rape scene. And so people were seeing this NC-17 rating, and they were assuming it was because they filmed a rape scene, and so people protective of Marilyn Monroe, they're like, well, you know, do we have to see her raped on film? That seems untoward. And I'm not going to get into the argument about whether rape scenes in movies are okay, or if they're ever justified, or how to do them tastefully versus untastefully, and whether they work in the context of some films. That's a whole different argument, and it's probably an argument that is better made by people who have been touched by sexual assault, because they would seem to have more say in that thing. I have my own opinion, but that's not where we're going into here. But there's the idea that maybe that is so brutal and so graphic that the NC-17 was for that. Then I also heard a rumor that it was about a scene where oral sex is performed on Marilyn Monroe while she's having her period. As far as I know, I believe that there was an interview where the director shot that down, that's not what happens. And I don't even know if that happens in the book, so I don't know where that rumor got started. But there are a lot of people who are just sort of, there's a weird trend. It's mostly on like the Twitterverse. I don't know if it's in like real life. But people saying like, you know, maybe sex scenes shouldn't be in movies at all. And I think those people are just crazy. And so they were upset about that. Or that, you know, no sex scene needs to be graphic enough for the NC-17 rating. And I think those people are a little bit ignorant as far as how the MPAA, formerly the MPAA, rates sex scenes. Now, there is a very good documentary. It's a little, some of the information in it's a little out of date now, but it's called This Film Is Not Yet Rated. It was directed by Kirby Dick, who has co-directed a lot of the Me Too documentaries that have come out. There was The Invisible War, about rape and cover-up of that in the military and things like that. And it's a very good one because it sort of shows the rating system's arbitrary nature as well as how it treats homosexual sex and female pleasure more strictly than it deals with heterosexual sex and male pleasure. And so it's just a not really fairly aligned system. I'm not going to get too much into the rating system in general, but brief overview. There was a production code that had very stringent rules for it, and the motion picture industry adopted this as a way to try to avoid full-on government censorship, either at the national or the county or the state level. And this was in like the 30s, the 40s. And that production code lasted up until the 60s, when films, especially from Europe, like the French New Wave and stuff, that weren't beholden to these rules, started being successful on American shores, which showed there was an appetite for that. And then all of these, American movies where like, oh, the bad guy can't win, and all of these stuff. And then you also had these different filmmakers. That was the first generation of filmmakers who grew up with film, as opposed to the first generation of filmmakers who started off with either photography or stage or other sort of disciplines when film was new. And so a lot of these guys, and they were mostly guys, and they were dubbed like the New Hollywood later on. And they were people who definitely tried to push the envelope. And so in order to come up with or to align themselves with the new wave of things coming through, both from Europe and from American filmmakers who are pushing the envelope, they came up with this voluntary rating system. Voluntary should be in quotes, but it's different from government mandated, where if the government says it should be censored, then the government forces you to cut stuff out. So that's sort of like England, where you can't headbutt people, and obviously animal cruelty is looked down very badly, so you can't put that in movies. Or Canada, where David Cronenberg has talked about how the Canadian censorship board would take your film from you and cut it without your permission and all this stuff, and there's no recourse. And obviously it's always been in the news lately when some sort of Disney or Marvel movie tries to put in something that is attenuated to gay rights or whatever, and then they can't show those movies in the Middle East or culturally and religiously restrictive countries that won't allow that because they're bigoted, because religion is bigoted. So there's all of that stuff. There's like forced censorship. So the MPAA, formerly the MPAA, when technically the MPA or the MPAA is the motion picture industry's lobbying group. And then what rates it is a subdivision of the MPA called CARA, the Classification and Ratings Administration. So when people say the MPAA or the MPA or the Ratings Board or CARA, they're usually talking colloquially of the same thing. They're talking about rating movies. So it's voluntary in that sense, in that there's no government censorship. It's a board made up of people in the film industry, supposedly parents, and then there's also some like various clergy members that really shouldn't be there, but what have you. There's a lot of problems with it. And then they created the different ratings, and the ratings have changed over time. But originally there was an R rating, which basically meant adults only, but if you were an adult, you could bring a kid in with you if they're under 17. They put the age at 17 for some reason. And then there was an X rating, but X was then used by pornography, because this is back in the day where porn showed at movie theaters. People would go in and watch them. There was no home video at this point yet. But the MPA did not trademark their ratings, and even something along the lines of Jack Valenti, who was the head of it for a very long time. He said something like, hey, if the porn industry wants to use the rating, be my guest or whatever, and they did. And so there was a stigma attached where, R was considered a legitimate rating and X was considered a porn rating. And so a lot of like mainstream theaters, if you had a non-pornographic film that got an X rating, most famously Midnight Cowboy, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, I think it's been re-rated as an R. It'd only be an R rating today. But Midnight Cowboy, which is not a pornographic film, it's an Oscar-winning film with Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight, but that got an X rating. And so for a while, people were like, especially people in the industry, were like, there really should be a rating that says, hey, we are not porn, but this still is an adults-only film. Because the only difference between, technically the only difference between like an X and an R at the time, and then NC-17 and R later, is that with an R, a parent can take their child to it, or just, an 18-year-old can take a 12-year-old to it. But with NC-17, they can't. So you're basically taking the rights away from the parents to show them the movie, whatever, at least in the theater. Which kind of goes to my opinion that that R should just be the end of it. There shouldn't be anything above R, but that's neither here nor there. So around 1994, X was finally replaced with NC-17, and NC-17 was trademarked. And the idea was we could finally have legitimate adults-only movies. And so you had stuff like Henry and June and various art house pictures. And it wouldn't have that stigma. The problem is the NC-17 still had the stigma because Newspapers, back when newspapers were where people got their showtimes, would not run print advertisement for NC-17 films. Certain video stores, including Blockbuster, which people have nostalgia for and shouldn't, they would not stock NC-17 films. In fact, sometimes Blockbuster edited R-rated films without the filmmakers or the studio's permission. So even though these films weren't censored or banned in any governmental sense, with like prior restraint or anything, and movie theaters wouldn't show them as well. They were basically unable to make any money because you could not advertise them, show them, or distribute them because these companies were capitulating to some sort of moral draconian whatever, and so you couldn't show them. And then in 1995, an actual major studio, MGM, or United Artists, and a major director, Paul Verhoeven, and a major screenwriter, Joe Esterhazy, made Showgirls, which was the first big studio, decently budgeted NC-17 film. And the film is not good. It's enjoyable, it's trashy, it's fun, but it's not a good movie. And because it was sleazy and sexual as opposed to artsy and sexual, it sort of put the nail in the coffin. Plus, it bombed. So it put the nail in the coffin of NC-17 for a very long time. And in fact, one could say to this day. So NC-17 films are still made here and there. Orgasmo, a comedy by the South Park guys, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, as an NC-17. I don't think it deserves it, but it was released with an NC-17. It's a very funny movie. Blue is the warmest color, as I mentioned. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Mostly because there's a graphic 7 or 8 minute long lesbian sex scene in it, sort of smack dab in the middle of this 3-hour movie. There was Lust Caution by Ang Lee, so big director there. So movies are still getting released with an NC-17. It's just normally major theaters won't play them, like AMC or Regal, or if they do, it's very rarely. And you know, Blockbuster isn't a thing, but Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, back when they were a thing, they wouldn't show them. So there is an argument to be made now that with streaming, the stigma can finally go away because, I mean, if they're willing to put it on the streaming service, then you can just watch it. You don't have to worry about theaters and whether they'll show it or not. And, you know, if you're a streaming service, you just advertise it on your own service. So it doesn't matter if websites won't take the banner ad for it or whatever and that sort of thing. But there's still a lot that is kind of messed up. And I think part of the stigma still exists because the people who were attacking this movie, Blonde, for having an NC-17 are sort of part of that stigma where it's like, oh, well, if it has this NC-17, then that means it's exploitative or trashy or whatever. But then you also have to remember, how does the rating system define what is going to be an R and what is going to be an NC-17? It's not as clearly delineated as porn, where it's like, oh, well, if it has on-screen sexual penetration, then it's obviously porn, then it's obviously NC-17. No, because, I mean, as I mentioned, Orgasmo is a film that got an NC-17 really just for language, because there's very little female nudity in it. There's lots of man-ass, but man-ass has never gotten anyone an NC-17. There's no erect penises, which is something that can get you an NC-17. There's no fluids. There's nothing that you would think would be major to get you an NC-17. There's nothing close to like that final scene with Jennifer Connelly in Requiem for a Dream or anything like that in Orgasmo. And that documentary I mentioned, this film is not yet rated, that sort of went into movies that got an NC-17 that likely did not deserve it. I mentioned Blue Valentine. That was a movie that originally got an NC-17 because of a scene where Ryan Gosling is performing oral sex on Michelle Williams. And it ended up getting appealed to the board and was overturned, and then it got an R rating. And I saw that movie with my mother in the theater, so that I guess that tells you something. It's an excellent movie, though. And there's other things. I think Kevin Smith has famously, there's a scene that's not particularly graphic in Clerks 2 involving a man and a donkey, and that was originally NC-17 and edited down. I think Clerks was originally an NC-17 just for language. It seems weird that a movie can be not just NC-17, but even R just for words being spoken. But as most people know at this point, for the difference between the word fuck in a PG-13 and in an R is that in a PG-13 you can use it about twice in a non-sexual context, like fuck you, but you can only use it once in a sexual context, like I'm going to fuck you. I think the movie Rent, which had a PG-13, I think they have fuck more than twice in that, but it's in song lyrics, because I do remember being surprised that didn't get an R for that. But there's been, with the exception of Orgasmo, there's been other movies that have gotten NC-17 just for language. I remember Martin Lawrence's, he had a stand-up movie back when they made stand-up movies that actually premiered in theaters. Well, I guess Kevin Hart had one when I worked at the theater. But I believe it was called You So Crazy or something like that. It wasn't Run Till That, so I think it was You So Crazy, and that got an NC-17 just for language. And I don't know, I mean, unless you live in like Mormon, Utah, my guess is every teenager has heard, most swear words and sexual terms, especially with the internet, so it seems kind of stupid to have a movie just be R or just be NC-17 solely for language, just swear words. I guess if they're describing something in general, then maybe I could see it if it's of a sexual nature, but who knows. But even with sex, sometimes it's just counting the number of thrusts, like 3 thrusts is R, but 5 thrusts is NC-17, or, how long a shot lingers. One of the stupidest things I heard was with horror movies. Sometimes the difference between a PG-13 horror movie and an R-rated horror movie is if the ratings board thinks that the music is too intense. Like, the music is too intense, it's a horror movie. Why would, suddenly, like, an extra, F sharp means that under 17 can't go to this movie, even though everything else in it's PG-13? It's absurd. So, I mean, it's going to be very arbitrary that way, because you can either have a qualitative rating system, or you can have a quantitative rating system, and I think the MPAA hasn't decided that, because, I mean, if you're literally counting thrusts, or you're counting the seconds of an ass shot, or you're counting F words, then you're quantitative. But if you're just saying, like, oh, the music's too intense, then that is qualitative. This is all kind of going just a long way around the block to say that the reason Blonde has an NC-17, it might be the stupidest fucking reason in the world. It might be just that there's too much thrusting in a sex scene. Then again, I was thinking about Wolf of Wall Street, and that movie got an R. But that's also another thing, too. So the MPAA, it's kind of well established that they've always been more favorable to a major studio film than an independent film. In that documentary, I think they interview Matt Stone, and they talked about the difference between putting Orgasmo behind the ratings board, where it got an NC-17, and the South Park movie, where it did originally get an NC-17, but as far as what to cut, they told them, like, oh, well, this specific thing, if you trim this, if you change this, if you replace this, they, like, actually gave them notes as far as how to obtain the R rating, whereas for an independent film, no. It's also worth noting you have to pay to have a movie rated. I think it's like $3,000 or something. You have to give them a copy of the movie and give them money to rate it for you. So there's a lot of that. Now, Netflix is a member of the MPAA, or MPA now. They did join the lobbying group. I think there was a big to-do when they did that. So I guess the MPAA would consider them a major studio. But it also seems like in this case, the director wanted an NC-17, that he was trying to flaunt it. So it wasn't that the movie was filmed and the ratings board gave it that, and they tried to appeal it or they tried to edit it. They seemed perfectly happy, having that NC-17 slapped on it. I guess is maybe a marketing gimmick or whatever. But the thing is, until this movie screens, we're not going to know why it has an NC-17. And so a lot of the people attacking it, they're attacking it for a couple different reasons. They're attacking it because the movie that's in their mind is like some sleazy fuckfest that just exploits Marilyn Monroe, or they're attacking it because they just don't think sex should be in movies or anything like that. Or some of them are just attacking it regardless of what it is. They just think like, hey, a movie that's based on a fictitious novel has no business being made about Marilyn Monroe. So there's a lot of weird reactionary opinions about that. And it seems to be mostly coming from the Marilyn Monroe superfans, as well as a certain weirdly culturally conservative and yet politically liberal group of people, of like Gen Zers on Twitter who have this like weird opinion stuff. It's obviously not my opinion. I mean, it's possible I might see the movie and think like, oh, like this such and such scene is, uncalled for or whatever. I can see, if this ends up being Marilyn Monroe's I Spit on Your Grave, then maybe that's a little too much for someone who actually existed. But it's quite possible that maybe this got an NC-17 just because, there's too many Merkin shots or something. We just don't know. But I just found it very odd that people were attacking it for having this rating, and they seem to be ignorant of the different things that can get you this rating and how unfair the rating system is, and that they were attacking it just based on it, like, how dare they even make an adaptation of this novel. And the funny thing is, this isn't the first time the novel's been adapted either. It was adapted into a miniseries in 2001 that aired on CBS. Now, obviously, if it aired on CBS, it's obviously not NC-17. It's just a miniseries that probably, in 2001 they had the TV rating system, so maybe it was like TV-14 or TVMA or whatever. But it was broadcast television, so it wouldn't have been too out there. But it's already been adapted. The story has been told on film before, just not as an artsy black and white movie. There's also some people who were at least attacking the movie for the casting, because Ana de Armas is playing Marilyn Monroe, and she definitely looks the part. If you look at the trailer and you see the footage of it, she definitely looks like Marilyn Monroe. But she's done nothing to cover up her accent, and obviously Marilyn Monroe does not have a Cuban accent, so some people were attacking it for that. But, apparently the Marilyn Monroe's estate came out, and they said, hey, we have no problem with the casting, so, who are we to argue if, the people who have the rights to her likeness and stuff are saying it's okay. But it's without seeing this film, we don't know, is the rating justified or is it not? Is the scene or scenes that cause the rating justified artistically, or are they just exploitative or not? It's not necessarily bad if it's exploitative either, if it ends up being an exploitation movie, but right now they're marketing it as like an Oscar contender art type thing. But when you're dealing with the fictionalization of any real person, there's tasteful ways of doing that, and there's not tasteful ways. And this is based on a fictional novel, and the novel is not particularly well liked among Marilyn Monroe fans because it, has the conspiracy theory about her death and all of this other stuff that has no basis in, factual stuff or real life. I just think it's always funny when people attack stuff without seeing it. And I get that some stuff is inclined for that. Like recently, the trailer just dropped for that Hunter Biden movie that Robert Davi directed that has Gina Carano in it. Now, that movie's obviously right-wing propaganda. It obviously has an agenda. But it could be so bad it's good. It could be funny, So it's justified to probably attack that because we already know who's behind it. We know where it's coming from, all of that stuff. With Blonde, we don't really know. We don't know how faithful it is to the source material, or if it diverts from that. We don't know how faithful it is to the literal facts of Marilyn Monroe's life or not. We don't really know anything. All we know is that it has a rating for, quote, some sexual content. We know that the source material is a novel, which has been out for 20 years, so we know what's in the novel. And we've seen a trailer and we've seen a teaser, and that's about it. So unless you worked on the movie, unless you saw a copy of the shooting script, unless you were invited to an advanced screening of it, if maybe it had to be shown to some of, if you're on the MPAA and you watched it to give its rating, unless you're one of those people, nobody knows what's in this. And it's quite possible that, maybe the movie sucks, maybe it's terrible, maybe it's morally reprehensible. We don't know. I just find it very odd that people were attacking it for that. And for the people who are attacking it just because no movie should get an NC-17 or no movie should have explicit sexual content, I don't know where those prudes are coming from. I mean, sex is a part of life. It's, so if movies are going to be a facsimile of life, with different levels of realism. I mean, obviously Thanos snapping is not realistic, but something like Marriage Story is. If we're going to do this facsimile of real life in narrative fiction, sex is a big part of life. So to completely like wipe that out of subject matter we can cover, that seems a little bit silly. There's a lot of sort of reactionary feelings, like almost like weirdly ostensibly liberal censorship going on of that nature, and I just don't get it. I mean, if the movie has like gratuitous, uncalled for, and disrespectful sex scenes, critics will call that out. But, you know, maybe if you're already against the existence of the film, then maybe you're just grasping at straws as far as what you want to be angry about. You know, if you don't think a movie should be made based on this novel, or you don't think a fictional film should be made about Marilyn Monroe, that's your business. But it just struck me as very weird, so just the discourse that came around this movie, especially when that full trailer came out and people were talking about the NC-17 and all of that stuff. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below what you think about the idea of a Marilyn Monroe movie based on a fictional novel, or the NC-17 rating, or the rating system in general. Any of the topics that I have talked about here in this extemporaneous little rant about the weird backlash to a rating for a movie that no one has seen. Housekeeping items. So when I get my Vinegar Syndrome package in a few days or whatever, it all depends on FedEx, I'll do an unboxing for that. Recently, there was also a special release of the Halsey movie it's like a Blu-ray CD set with like a book in it, so I might do an unboxing for that just because it's interesting. Kind of like I did for the Midsummer special Blu-ray that A24 Shop put out. And then September's going to be a little busy for me. Obviously, I'm going to Halloween Horror Nights, as I do every year, except for 2020 when it was canceled because of the pandemic. So that happens this month. I have a business trip that I'm taking later this month. So there's that going on. So September's going to be a little busy, so I'm not sure how often I'm going to upload stuff. But, you know, I'll do the normal unboxings. I'll do, you know, Leninhawk talks like this, maybe something else that, you know, comes to mind. Maybe I'll do more on-camera reviews or whatever. It just sort of depends on when I'm not being lazy and when I'm mentally in a good place and when I have something I want to talk about. So, anyway, thank you all for listening to this rant for however long you did. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. The more engagement I get on videos, the more often I'll make them. But thank you all for sticking with this, and I hope you have a good day. Until next time.